What would you say was the relationship of the Ministry of Finance revenue arm to that of the central bank?
Say that again. The relationship between Ministry of Finance revenue.
Yeah, Ministry of Finance and the whole revenue, specifically to the central bank. When revenue is collected, did it go to the central bank? Did the central bank serve as a repository for all government revenues, even though accounts may have been placed in separate commercial banks?
Initially, because we wanted to capture all the taxpayers, and the Central Bank Act had not been passed. I think it was passed subsequent to that. Every commercial bank had an account of government for government. And so if your bank was LBDI, there was an account in LBDI where it was convenient for you to go and pay your taxes, your personal check to LBDI and get a flag receipt from there. Later on, when they passed the Central Bank Act, then of course Central Bank of Liberia became the single repository for all government revenue, except in case of special arrangements where we had an arrangement, I believe, with EcoBank, where we deposited the payments for driver's license, license plate, and all of that. And the reason for that was because it was a dedicated account, and we had to pay for the printing of the plates, or like LBDI had for the passports. And these were dedicated accounts because the bank was responsible for collecting the money that was due to the vendor who printed the passport or printed the plate. And I think there were only in 1 or 2 cases like that the central bank did not receive the money, but the commercial bank did.
Now, recalling statements by the President upon her assumption of office that the Ministry of Finance was rotten with corruption, and at one point had even stated that those who were in charge of departments and all of that needed to be replaced because the Ministry of Finance was rotten. Is there any validity to such? And what was the situation during your tenure when civil servants were known not to have taken pay for months? Was there any impact on overall revenue performance as a result of such a situation?
Well, when the 1997 group took over in September, civil servants had not been paid up to, I don't know, 13 months or something. And we regularized the payroll through the streamlining process. And in the last few months of 2003, when the war really hit, and revenue, or the sort of thing, revenue diversion from maritime and other sources were going out for military purposes, you might say. So there was a shortfall in revenue available to pay civil servants. Now, with the statement on the corruption, I think you will hear even now that there were people who were falsifying the flag receipts. We had cases where even at some of the banks, where the teller and the taxpayer, there was collusion between them, where somebody come to pay their taxes and put the teller would put something under there and write the correct amount on the top, and give the taxpayer, innocent taxpayer, a perfectly decent receipt. For example, $50,000. We found a case one time where the taxpayer came in with $50,000, and I'm going through the records, and there is a section in revenue called the revenue accounts. They send a monthly report to the deputy revenue at the end of every month to record those taxpayers that had made payments. And you see one taxpayer record $5, and then you ask, well, how can this taxpayer pay $5 when he's running this kind of business? So you call the taxpayer, and he comes in with a receipt for $50,000. So you ask for, like I said, finance got 2 copies, the bank retained 1, and the taxpayer got 1. All right, so that's 4 copies of the flag receipt. And we found out when the taxpayer came in with his $50,000 tax receipt, that what was actually recorded and came back to the Ministry of Finance was $5. So the corruption is there at all levels. Well, I wouldn't say all levels, but I always say that the sewage is on the ground floor. It's not necessarily upstairs on the first 3 floors, because you have to rely on because of the nature of tax administration at the time. Now they're paying everything, and we started the process of paying directly to the bank through the computer system, where the computer would generate what we call the BPS, the bank payment slip. Now, if you rely on somebody down there to do it, there's a 50-50 chance of diversion of the revenue.
In your presentation, did I understand you to have said that you did not meet with the panel of experts?
No, I didn't meet with any panel of experts.
I mean the UN panel of experts.
No, I didn't meet with any panel. I met with one man at the Royal Hotel maybe 3 years ago, who asked me some questions about the same $8 million transfer, but I did not meet the panel of experts. And they went and wrote stories that were not true.
Was he representing the panel, or which institution was he representing?
I guess he was representing, he said that he was representing the UN, and he wanted to ask me some questions at Royal Hotel. I don't even remember his name. But I did not meet the panel. They didn't ask me any questions. And they went ahead and wrote stories. I had gone to Nigeria and I had traveled this place, which was not true.
Now, coming back to Natura, sometime during the tenure of the late President Doe, the university was granted a forest area. And I don't know who managed it at the time, but during your period, during your time, was there a concession agreement or any such agreement managing that particular forest by Natura?
The first time I heard of Natura was when they came and said they needed tax credits because this was one of Mr. Covenhoven's company. And they had a concession agreement filed with the Secretariat. I saw it at the time, basic concession agreement, 5-year tax investment incentives and that kind of thing. And they had paid a tax advance to the university of $2 million. Right. This was verified by the president that the tax advance had been made to the University of Liberia, and they requested a flag receipt to acknowledge receipt of this payment. Now, when the president of Liberia acknowledges that a payment had been made and authorizes the issuance of a flag receipt, we do that.
But it's difficult for me to comprehend how the president will issue a statement acknowledging that money has been paid into our tax revenues.
No, it was not paid into our tax revenues.
Or paid to where?
Said the money was being paid to the university.
And this was being reflected as income earned by the government of Liberia.
I acknowledge it as such, yes.
But how to confirm that such income was received?
Because the president of Liberia did confirm that the income was received, and I took his word for it. I did not go behind his back to check whether it was received or not. The representative of the company is in my office, and I get in writing that Natura has paid this money. It was okay to issue the flag receipt, and I did. And I think it was beyond my purview. Commissioner will go after him and verify that it has been paid.
But if we take it that public functionaries are supposed to safeguard the public trust, would it not be, did you not consider out of the way that the president would give a go-ahead that this money has been paid without your institution corroborating that this amount has been paid?
That's the way it was.
And you accepted it as it was?
Yes.
Now, how can you just briefly give us a picture of government's fiscal policy during the years?
In terms of revenue?
Yes. Revenue performance.
The revenue performance, the nice picture would be the procedure I outlined to you about the way the taxes should have been collected, and in most cases the way the taxes were collected. The exceptional cases was, and this is my assumption only, that perhaps due to the conflict situation that we were in, things didn't always go according to policy. But we made revenue projections for the year, for the period. We made revenue projections. And if there was some shortfall, we would like to know why there was some shortfall. And if money was paid that should have come into government revenue, we recorded that money as part of our projection. We didn't let it go. We recorded it as projection. For example, if we projected $25 million for a month, and most of the time I think we were averaging about $6 million a month. If we projected $6 million a month and found out that we only have $4 million, then we went after what happened to the rest. We would check maritime, we would check forestry, we would check the major taxpayers to find out what happened to the rest. And if we found out that they had already paid that money, then we said, well, this is money that had been projected by the revenue department, and we were not going to just have a shortfall because the money went, say, to somewhere else. So we took that money in and then made a notation that this money was not cash to the government, it was cash paid to such and such a destination.
Now, the money paid by, or the contribution by Mr. Pavarotti,
no, I know about that.
Was that recorded as part of government revenues?
We did not even hear about it.
But we in the public heard that there was a contribution for the construction of a children's village, the Pavarotti Fund. There's such, I'm asking, such,
no,
such channels.
Such revenue did not come through, such money did not come through the revenue department. Pavarotti from Italy, no, that money. No, it did not come through the revenue.
Okay, now, there was I guess, did you serve during the period when Mr. Barnes was Minister of Finance?
Yeah.
There was an agreement that was reached between the Ministry of Finance and the LPRC for concerning the National Housing Bank, Housing and Savings Bank. And that agreement called for the Republic of Liberia to absorb the liabilities of the LPRC into the government accounts, absolve the LPRC of any amount owed, and in return, the government of Liberia, through the Ministry of Finance, was to receive $400,000 a year for a 10-year period in petroleum products. Were you aware of such an agreement? We're not aware. This agreement was signed by Mr. Snow, by Mr. Barnes, by Mr. Finlay.
Well, unless it affected revenue where money actually came in, then I would know about it, and whichever bank that money was paid into would have issued a flag receipt to LPRC.
There was an agreement calling for $400,000 worth of petroleum products. To be paid, well, $400,000 to be paid on an annual basis for a 10-year period to the government of Liberia through the Ministry of Finance, but that will be in the form of petroleum products supplied to the ministry. At the time, the ministry was on record of purchasing fuel. Were you aware of this? Or was the Concession Secretariat in the Ministry of Finance aware of that?
If it was a purchasing contract, sir, it would have come through expenditure, not revenue.
Not purchasing contract.
Revenue contract.
Did it
generate revenue? Not from my office, no.
400,000, and your office was not aware of that?
No. If it came to the bank, if they paid it automatically to the bank, okay, the bank would issue a revenue. If somebody sent me a note and say LPRC has given 400,000, please take it in as revenue, or please issue a flag receipt, I would know about it and I would record it. But that did not come to my attention.
No.
Maybe Mr. Barnes may have handled it another way.
Yes, but I put it within the context of revenue that due to come into the government. Government's coffers, and you as chief magistrate of government generating arm would have an idea. Anyway, during that period, or during the years, the Ministry of Finance was the statutory chairman of Liminco. the Ministry of there was an agreement
Yeah.
that was reached to sell ore from Liminco, owned by Liminco, again talk about revenue, to interested buyers. How much was projected to be received by government as a result of that agreement? And was that agreement in any way channeled through or handled by the Concession Secretariat?
All of those agreements should have been handled by the Concession Secretariat. To the best of my knowledge, the Concession Secretariat is party to all of those agreements. They should be, because they represent the technical arm of the ministry.
But as it turned out, the Minister of Finance at the time was chairman of the board of directors of this company to whom the ore had been sold. I can't recall the name of the company now, but I
thought you said he was chairman of the board of Liminco. I thought
yes,
he was chairman of Liminco.
he was chairman of the board of Liminco. And at the same time, there was a private company that was formed in which he was chairman or shareholder, and this ore was sold to this company. I can't remember the company offhand, but I have the...
If I'm not aware that cash came from that company, maybe they just... Now you see, cash may come into the bank with hundreds of taxpayers and hundreds of people paying, and all the revenue accounts office will do is record it. Okay? It may not necessarily come across my desk, and I would not necessarily have been party to the agreement. All right?
From the position that it is revenue projected to be received by government.
No, we didn't necessarily. If, for example, we do our revenue projections for this year in January, and this deal goes down in October, there's no way we would have known in January, a year prior to that, that this deal is going to go down. Therefore, we'll take it in as revenue projections.
Not necessarily deal, but the projections will come from the fact that the ore is on the ground, and when this ore is sold, X number of dollars. You cannot
estimate a projection based on the potential that when this ore is sold. We're doing our revenue projection.
You have a knowledge of the tonnage of ore, and you have a knowledge of world market prices. So you would know without even the ore being sold that this represents a potential revenue.
It's a potential revenue, but not a revenue that we can budget on. We work with the budget.
Granted, granted. The point is, it will be revenue that may flow into the government.
May is the operative word here.
That should.
It may, or it should, but if it does not, I cannot take it. I cannot project something that I'm not sure I can perform on. All right?
Were you aware of this?
I can perform. If each of you here is due to pay $10, I can put in my revenue projection 10 times 7, project $70. But if you tell me that these people here may or may not be in this office, I can project definitely on them.
That's a different cup of tea.
It's the same thing.
No? Here you have assets that can be sold, from which revenue can be derived.
Okay, stop right there. Assets that can be sold is not something that you can make a budget to pay civil service salary on. It may or may not be sold. If it comes in, it's a windfall.
Advance another question. Let's move forward.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Testing. Okay, we're very happy again that you could join us to shed light on these points. That you have some refreshment there?
No, it's okay.
Okay. All right. I'm just trying to understand generic issues that are very important. For example, the normal process for payments to be made to the Bank of Liberia was for a company or individual to pay into your bank account, right? You had several bank accounts at Central Bank and various other private banks.
Initially, we used the commercial bank, but once the Central Bank Act was passed, then 2000.
So during the period from 1997 to 2003, there was a Central Bank Act passed in around 2000.
Around 2000, I think.
Okay, and what did that do?
The Central Bank Act authorized the Central Bank of Liberia to receive all government revenue. All the collection of government revenue was centralized in the Central Bank of Liberia.
That became a legal
That
process.
was a legal document, yes.
For everything, even if I owe the government $10,
You
it
pay
has
to
to
the
go
Central
through the
Bank of
Central Bank.
Liberia, yes.
Okay.
And the Central Bank of Liberia, like the commercial banks before then, was given a stack of pre-numbered government official receipts, and that for every payment made, they recorded it, and it was done manually at the time by the teller to receive the payment.
But yet you just told us also that there are cases where people would receive money in the government, particularly the president's situation, as a verifier, and then people will come to you later to get receipts that this money was
And then he would
received.
verify that he did, or the Minister of State for Presidential Affairs would verify that this money was indeed paid. And then there was a situation that led to that. If the mansion requested money, which is the correct procedure, from the Ministry of Finance Expenditure Department, and it was an emergency and there was a delay at the Ministry of Finance, and sometimes the word delay for small amounts, 10,000 or something, the president took it upon himself to call a vendor and say, look, I need this $10,000, and they give it to him.
They would give him cash.
They would give him the cash or whatever form it took. And then he would acknowledge it to my office, because I'd go after the vendor for tax payments, and he would say on such and such a date, we paid this money to the mansion. And most often than not, the Minister of State would verify that the payment was indeed made in the form of a letter.
And you have those letters on file? I mean,
I haven't
the
been there since
Ministry of
2003,
Finance
but they should be
should
there.
be-
Yeah.
those letters should be on file.
And Minister Taylor, who was Minister of State at the time, would also verify that.
Jonathan Taylor,
Jonathan Taylor.
is he with the government now?
No, he's not.
Or is he in the country now?
Yes, he is.
So you say this was done a lot, in a sense, in many cases like this where...
Well,
the
I wouldn't say a lot, but in instances where it was done, we acknowledge receipt of the payment.
Okay. So for example, this issue with this Natura company, where this was almost $2 million, which is not a small amount, and there was a letter sent to you by the president that the government of Liberia had received this money.
The money had been paid, yes.
You have you said
We
you
have
some
something
letters
with
at
the-
home. Was that one of those letters you kept?
Yeah, I have. That was about the only thing I kept.
Oh, is it possible we would have a copy of that just for our file?
I already told Commissioner Bull that I would give her a copy.
So in this case, according to your knowledge, this $2 million or so was paid to the University of Liberia.
That was the indication given to me at the
In
time.
the letter, it specified that the University of Liberia has received this $2 million. Therefore, as president, I'm verifying that it's okay.
Well, not in so many words, but there was a list of payments that he had okayed.
Right.
And that okayed to me because I wouldn't give a receipt unless I had something in hand. You know, right now my neck is on the line, but I have that too.
So if there's any evidence then that this money was put into a private account, for example, of the president, what would you have to say about something like that? Minister or deputy minister of our government at that time?
I'll say
Would it be a surprise thing, or did it happen before?
I would say that it's unfortunate because this is the statement that I was giving as to where this money was going. Okay, there were some instances where the money actually went into LBDI and it said Government of Liberia account, all right, at LBDI. And the money had already been put there or paid there, and and the person who paid, if you're a taxpayer and you pay somebody a good chunk of money and they tell you, okay, go to the Ministry of Finance and they will issue you a receipt for this. Okay, and if you came to the Ministry of Finance and say, I paid this money, it's money out of your coffers, and you want somebody to acknowledge that it's been received. All right, and if that somebody is me who has been instructed to give Mr. Coleman a receipt for this amount because it has been paid to the government of Liberia, then you put the pressure on me to give you the receipt, which you need for your shareholders and for your auditors.
No, I mean, I understand the
Yeah.
logistical process that you went
Yeah.
through. I'm just trying to understand whether in the ministry at the time did you all consider this kind of thing strange, or was it just the normal practice, or what, you know?
Those were not normal times, as I told you. There was conflict. I mean, we could hear guns going from all directions, and they really were not normal times. Okay.
This was
Now,
not
the first 2 years, for example, we didn't have too many of those until the conflict started in Lofa.
What time?
No, until it started in Lofa.
Oh, so around
Then there was a
1999.
period there when these things started to happen.
The beginning part, 97, 98, things were relatively normal.
It was relatively normal. We had procedures and
procedures were followed. But and there was no particular act or anything passed to give the president this type of abnormal power. It was just something he took upon himself, and everybody just sort of followed it. Did anybody make a request? Well, Mr. President, this is
Mr.
illegal.
Commissioner, I think you're asking me to make a moral judgment on that, and I can't do that. I can't tell you whether what it was done. I mean, you're working with your boss, who is the ultimate authority in the country, and then you're asking me to pass a moral judgment on that. And as Commissioner, sure, whatever you do, I can't do that.
I was concerned about, like you said, things were normal. There's a procedure.
There is a normal procedure for that. Yeah.
So now, when somebody moves away from that act, is it normal in a government amongst ministers, etc., to just accept a president's decision, or did you all feel that, well, because of this wartime, these are special rights that he should have?
It could be. I can't interject my feelings into that.
That was the mind in which you went
That's the
through
mind,
it,
yeah.
right? Okay, that's good. Okay. Anybody else have this kind of authority where you could get a letter from a deputy, a minister of commerce or a minister of state that you could accept this kind of thing to them? Only the president?
Yeah.
It was only the president you accept this kind of thing from?
There were, for example, some of the logging companies, they would go and build a road. They would be requested or work with the Ministry of Public Works to build a road. And they would build this road, and the Ministry of Public Works would acknowledge to me that there were 25 miles of road built. And based on the quality of this road, we are assessing it at $25 a mile, okay? And he would write a letter and request. In that case, there was a letter because I insisted on it. He would write a letter and request that this particular logging company be given credit for building 100 miles of road at $200 per mile, sort of thing. And that we did. But we always had the corresponding letter.
So who was the Minister of Finance during that period, 97 to 2003, with you? As deputy?
97, it started off with Eli Silibi. He was minister. After Eli Silibi, there was John Bestman, I think. And then Nat Barnes. And then Charles Bright.
You worked during that period with 4 ministers. Who was the deputy minister, the one that handled the expenses that you mentioned was just now?
The first deputy minister for expenditure was Morris Satuma, Honorable Morris Satuma. And after him, it was Mr. Charles Allen.
So that means when in 97 to 2003, these 2 gentlemen were the ones who handled all the release of money from the government?
Yeah, along with the comptroller. The comptroller was Rosamond Perkins, and later on it was Fulton Reeves. They were crucial in the expenditure process. And then of course there were the assistant ministers. One of them is dead now.
The larger big picture.
The larger picture.
The people who have the higher authority in the organization.
Yeah.
In your record, did the GOL of like this government ever purchase arms officially?
No, not in my records, no.
So from 1997 to 2003, the government of Liberia never purchased one arm.
No.
Before they
And even if they did, it wouldn't come through my office. And the records that I have for allocating these tax credits did not include any payment for arms.
to replenish the arms at our stockade place. So we never had to do any of this stuff officially. Everything that was done must have been done under the table somehow. Because
I don't know what was done, sir.
No, well,
not through my office. I don't know.
The UN put sanction on us. We saw arms coming in and out of the country,
we did.
And there was fighting going on.
I saw it the same way, like you saw it, but not through my office.
Yeah,
no.
the key point was nothing was done officially.
Yeah,
Okay.
the list that I would provide the commissioner with has in no place anything to do with arms. Okay, like I said, there was uniforms, there were patrol boats, there was a helicopter, and in some cases it said direct payment to government of Liberia account at LBDI or someplace else. Okay, but no arms.
Okay. Files or this a computer was dismantled at the ministry? I mean, was this an accidental thing or what happened?
I don't know, but when I left the Ministry of Finance in 2003, my office was, the office of the Deputy Minister of Revenue was taken over by Minister Crawford. What's his first name? Crawford. Okay. Not Nathan, his brother, Emmanuel, I think? Emmanuel, yeah. It was taken over, and I left all the records intact. There was an announcement on the radio that everybody who had been appointed by the previous administration had to vacate the office by so-and-so date, and we did that. We didn't, I didn't bother with packing too much stuff. The letter that I referred to just happened to be in my bag, and we left. So the records were all intact, but then I was told later on that in trying to access some documents out of the computer, the hard drive was damaged. But still, we kept pretty good files, and they should be there.
Does the government have like an asset listing registry of some sort that can be made available to review?
Asset listing?
Yeah, what we own as a country. You bought, for example, you bought the boat, you bought the helicopter. Is there a listing there showing like real government owns one helicopter, when it was retired from service, where the money was put into the
not that I know of.
You don't keep this kind of record?
Not, maybe you don't keep this
But I mean, the ministry doesn't keep this
no.
type of record of its own assets?
It's probably somewhere,
Like the
but I would
bulletproof
have it
card
like,
or
but something, the best place to have that kind of thing would be GSA.
Or GSA probably is
That would be the most appropriate place to have
Check
something
it.
like that.
So once you purchase something, then, I mean, it's GSA responsibility to keep track of the asset listing, the retirement planning.
And then again, it depends on how much
depreciation, all that.
information was disclosed to civil servants. You don't always receive the information that you should, and you work with what you got. And you can't go behind the president and say, I want to see this and I want to see that. Who set you up as auditor of the president?
So then that's my next question. Was there a system where once a year or a period has finished in government with activity based on budget expenditure, that an audit is done to see whether things were done right in that period? Is General Auditing Service the only facility that does this?
There was an auditor that came from the General Auditing Service and went through the ministry a couple of times. We had the auditors come from Ghana one or two times and go through a forensic audit of the revenue and the expenditure department. That definitely was done. The question of the asset list, I really didn't know, because we had so much work just trying to chase taxpayers that that wasn't on our purview.
Do you know about cases where government ministries were directly collecting public money and not passing through the system?
That was an
You
issue.
understand
That was a major issue. So much so that an act was passed. The act to centralize the collection of government revenue in the Ministry of Finance. that was an issue, and that act was passed.
That's the 2000 Act for the Central
No,
Bank?
the 2000 Act of Central Bank is a separate thing, but we tried to get the revenue centralized because it got to the point where every ministry had its own set of little payments and fees and form charges and all that kind of thing, and it was very difficult to get a handle on what was actually being collected, and so that act was passed.
When was that act passed,
Centralized
please?
it.
Approximately. Before 2000, before the Central Bank Act, or after that Central
I think it
Bank?
was after.
Okay.
I think it was after. But there is such an act. There is such an act.
Can you help me with just some position? I just want to get a feeling. If you don't know, you can just tell me, but I'm just wondering. Will you help me already with the Ministry of Finance at the time? Minister of Commerce, who was the Minister of Commerce during that period, 97 to 2003? And worked with
There was a minister who died. I don't remember his name. Yes, he was the first one in 1997. And then after that, there was Kaba, Dr. Kaba. And I think after Kaba there was Mrs. Peabody, Cora Peabody. I don't know if there's anything in between.
So, in summary, I can see from what you're telling me that there was a lot of space during the time of 1997 to 2003 for money to be collected directly from large business corporations, timber companies, mining companies, etc., and used by key confidants of the president without necessary records having to be put on file. That's the general statement seems that happened during that time, right?
It depends on the circumstances, and I wouldn't be that. I mean, I can be very, very. You might say naive and say I was the sole responsible collector of government revenue, but that wasn't true. We weren't obviously collecting everything that was due. Even the administrative tax administration process was very, it was limited. You're working with civil servants who've been doing things a certain way all along, and you come and try to change it. Even some of the people who we fired for doing some irregular stuff, they come back during the next administration and say they fired me because I didn't like Charles Taylor, and then they write back again, and then you hear their name in the papers for doing the same thing that we fired them for. Because I don't know if people don't like to read or what, but nobody goes through the record to see what they did. And so maybe what you're saying is true, but I think that they acted with some kind of authority. Okay, with some kind of authority, knowing that they would be covered if they took certain actions. If, for example, we anticipating $18 million collection in revenue, and we got 16 million, and then we reported that we got 16 million. And the Bureau of Maritime says, no, it wasn't 16 million. I can't report what he got. I could only report what I received from the bank.
So the reason I asked you, because yesterday we had a hearing of a small industry, let's say the timber, where we see that the reports you all had on record, finance, the central bank, and the FDA, were all different. You know, the differences in these reports. And then on top of that, actual statistical analysis was done on what actually left the port, and there was reports that over $100-something million worth of loans left the country during the period without anybody knowing anything about it. And then of course
somebody had to know. Somebody had to know. The ships had to leave the port, and the port needed to have records. Okay. The customs people were there to record it, even if they didn't necessarily get the money, or the money wasn't necessarily paid. They have the record. And this is how we managed to get bills and back bills. And whenever anything like this happened, I mean, I made sure that the FDA was party to the signature on the tax credits that we give, because they're the ones, the FDA officers down there, the customs officers, and then there's the port people. So somebody had some record of what was going out.
But the thing is, we have records also that ports were managed by private individuals who had vested interest directly with the president, so therefore it wouldn't be in their interest to review records. So a ship could go out at night and nobody would just know, or even the straight up people who were hired, civil servants, to keep tallies. If something should have been 20, they will put 10. And then nobody's going to stand on the ship and see that 20 is going when it's really 10. So I'm just saying that there was a lot of space for this kind of thing to happen. And I wonder in the new...
And maybe, I think maybe it was the tax administration. You know, everybody had an authority at the time. If you, for example, go to a commercial merchant ABC, and you want to make sure he has 5 or 10 aliens working there, and these aliens are supposed to be paying, that's one of the situation with the centralization of government revenue, and these aliens are supposed to be paying work permits. And you go there and you see the signature of a minister saying that this company has paid for his work permit to the Ministry of Labor. It's a frustrating thing for the revenue collector, because that is not supposed to be. Okay. All right? But things like that do happen.
Okay. I was wondering, during your administration, between the year 2000 and 2006, did a company like Lone Star, did they pay income tax to the government? Because we have
they paid. There was
they paid huge amounts.
There was. We have records of their paying. For example, the employees withholding taxes, they pay.
No,
but there was also
what they make.
There was also the 2% and the 4% payment that they did, and they did make in the payment. Our system of revenue is collection, is self-declaration. So they declared that they made so much money, and 2% of the top was the presumptive tax that was paid, the quarterly presumptive tax. And we do have records of payment, and you can't do too much about that except to send the auditors in and have them verify that what payment was made was what payment that should have been made.
You never did that?
We did that. We did that.
And did your auditors show any difference?
Yes, they did. And lots of times they showed the difference and some money was paid. Now, whether that difference was the correct difference is
so you're saying that the only payment you expected from them was this 2% and 4%?
The corporate taxes. They paid. Now, in their case, they fell in the 2% category because of the level of their income. They fell in that category. And we had records at the Ministry of Finance of payment of those taxes, of those amounts, so as well as the employee withholding taxes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to say, so in those days then, it was big corporations like that, all they had to pay was just 2% of the totals. If they made $10 million, they just had to pay a couple $100,000 to you.
The quarterly presumptive tax, 2% per quarter. And then they were required to file their tax returns, okay, during the tax period. They had to file. And then we would see the filing against what was paid, and if there was a shortfall, then they paid that amount also. That's the way it was.
So what were they expected to pay? Put it that way. That 2% was like an advance payment, with the understanding that at the end of the year, when you verified everything, what was the total amount they were expected to pay on their net income? Put it that way.
Well, then you would have to know what the net income is, sir. Otherwise, so you're making a presumption. Scale, right? Yes, and like when it started, initially, there's no way with about 5,000 subscribers that you can compare with what they're doing now, where I understand they have over 20,000 subscribers, so that would be a big jump. It would be a gradual increase.
So I'm just trying to understand whether, anyway, I guess I can ask the finance ministry for the tax rate at that time. Was it, what, 25% of the total income was supposed to have been paid as income tax?
The corporate income tax.
Yeah, corporate income tax? 25-30%, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and that 2% was just an advance?
That 2% is an advance presumptive income tax that we collected.
At the end of the period now,
then
the difference, a total of the 25, meaning 23 more percent or whatever,
the corporate taxes
would have to be paid.
Would have to be paid.
And you're saying that Lone Star paid up everything well?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Oh, that's not.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm telling you the process by which it should have been done. And they did make some payments. But only the auditors can go in there and find out by some kind of a audit review whether what was paid was correct or not, and whether we have a shortfall. I can't tell you that.
So from 2000 to 2003, from when you were there, your feeling was that was there a need to further investigate Lone Star, or were you satisfied with the payment they had made to you, to the government?
We never satisfied with any payment anybody makes.
Okay,
We
so
send
you
the
would say
auditors
that
in.
there
Yes.
was be a need
Yes.
to go further.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I want to understand. And why was it that Shaw and Urey were put up for this? Is it that they were administrators of that organization?
I don't know why they single out Shaw and Urey. Number one, I'm saying I didn't meet no panel of experts.
No, not to a panel
And
expert issue. I'm talking about the Lone Star.
The Lone
These
Star,
two
why
people
Shaw and
had
Urey,
any
as far as I
leadership.
know, were employees
They were
of the
employees
company. I
of
was
the
not
company.
aware that they were also shareholders or
Was their
anybody was
positions, please?
shareholders.
Their positions, please? As employee, what were their
They were,
positions?
I don't know.
Janitor, I mean, or I assume somebody like Shaw and Urey.
Well, maybe they were in top executive position, I really don't know.
Oh,
But
you don't know.
if they were employees, then they were paying employees withholding taxes. If they were paid dividend, that's what the auditors will find out.
Okay. And then with the maritime issue, you did mention that there's time where they were paying money to the government, but you'll notice that there was a difference factor. Now, this difference factor, is there any clarification of what it could have meant? I mean, is it that this maritime company was paying money to somebody else that didn't go through your records, or just that they were stealing money from the government and weren't paying what they should have been paying to us, or what? How did you see that difference?
I don't know what could account for the difference, but there were times when our records, which were based on bank advice, issued by the bank saying we received this amount of money from Maritime, all right? Maritime Commission in turn made a report of what they were collecting or they were supposed to collect. And I'm saying that our records did not always jive.
Was it big or small? $50, $100, or $1 million? $2
No, it
million?
wasn't $100. No, that wouldn't be. There was just maybe 1,500,000, something like
So
that.
it's a big amount.
So yeah, it's a big amount that I'm sure could be explained.
So it was never really verified during your administration or your period?
No, it
Just one of
wasn't
those
verified, or if there was an explanation, the explanation was there, but I wasn't. Everybody was happy to it, but I didn't go after it.
Okay, thank you very much.
With your permission, Mr. Chairman, Madam Witness, did you ever serve FDA? Did you ever work for FDA?
No, no,
You worked for LPNC, right?
no. LTP, which was Vamply at the time, the Liberia Timber and Plywood Corporation in China. Yeah.
Well, you gave us, you spoke up here, and from the way you spoke or the key to ask those questions, you must have some professional background in something, because, so could you please, before you leave, give us a little more your professional background, tell us a little more about yourself, like, because you were in history, way from, not so much of in school, your professional background, enough for us to know when witness Juanita Mason is Juanita Mason.
Well, I grew up in Robertsport. I'm the daughter of a General Mason, Jonathan Mason, who was from Robertsport, and my mother was commonly called Lady Johnson. I went to high school at CWA, and later on to Mount Holyoke College in South Hadley, Massachusetts. I majored in chemistry. And then I went to Harvard University intending to work on a master's program, but I did enough work there and got married and came home. I completed my master's later on at college in Massachusetts. My first job when I came from school in 1970 was with the Liberian Mining Company as salary accountant. And because I came home with a degree in chemistry, they put me in the industrial chemistry lab to just test the iron ore. And after a while, if you remember Jerusha Holder, she was in the cashier's office. And when she left, got married to Bill and left, they called me in to do the salary accounting. So I was handling salaries for the expatriates and other high officials. Later on, I transferred as resident manager for LMC to Monrovia. And when LMC closed down, I was given the task of finding jobs for the over 3,000 employees who had lost their jobs as the result of that closure. So in the process of trying to place our mechanics, heavy-duty drivers, and all of these professional people in the various areas, I ran into the Bong Mining Company, who took several of our engineers. I worked with Bong Mines for 5 months as an insurance adjuster, and I wasn't very happy with the Liberianization policy they had there. So when Vanply asked me to come and work for them as resident manager in 1988, I accepted the job where they asked me to name my own salary, which was nice. And when the company closed down in 1980 because of the war, you know, the Americans, Vanply was an American company that started with Vancouver plywood from Canada, and J. Paul Getty from the States. It was a $17 million investment. But when the Paul Getty group, the Vanply group, decided that they had enough of whatever they were doing in Liberia, they turned the company over to a small group of American executives. They went to President Talbot at the time and said they had this company, and they were preparing to offer him shares in the company. And he said no, he wouldn't take any personal shares, but he would turn the shares over to the Truick Party. So the Truick Party had 51% of the Vanply shares, and the American executive headed by a guy named Bob Huff, he had 49% of the shares. And so I was working with them until 1980 when the coup occurred. And what they did, they had a little helicopter that went into the bush, picked them up, took all the American executives. There weren't that many, there were about 3 or 4 of them, because of the activities in the country at the time, they had shipped all of their families out. So there was just, I think, the general manager and 2 other Americans. So they left from a place called Mile 20 in the bush. They took off, and of course everything started to happen down there. There was West End who had gone down there, was shooting up the place, and I had to run to the mansion and tell them to give me some people to come down to Vanply and try to quiet the situation. So he gave me, I went down to Vanply with Bai Bala, Johnny Boy, and Isaac Musa, who just died the other day. And we went down there, and I had to stand between Johnny Boy, Herring, and Kuwampa. So I went down there, and there was Kuwampa that way and West End that way, and they took out their guns and they started to. So I thought I was dead, standing in the middle, and then they wanted to know who reported us to that board down there named Doe. So I kind of came in there. At the time, I must have weighed about 100 pounds, and I came in there, and you small girl, you reported us. And anyway, the bottom line is they took out their guns to shoot each other. And from the back of my head, I saw the nurse. I had my eyes closed tight. I saw the nurse coming from the clinic, and when I saw her, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. Somebody with a, anyway, somebody came up, Kuwampa came up, and there was somebody else. He came up and said he stopped it. He put his gun back. He stopped it, and he said, "Okay, when we go to Monrovia, we will solve this thing." So meantime, I had to travel with Mr. Bagbala to go, because what happened as soon as the executives left, they closed all of the accounts. They went to the accounts and started to withdraw money. Laws had been shipped to buyers who were sending money to the company account. So what I did, I went to Citibank. They were still here, and I asked them to freeze the account. I called the other people and asked everybody to just freeze the account, because we didn't know what was going on and what these people, we didn't want any more money withdrawn until we knew what was going on. And so I'm sitting in my office one day, I get this telephone call from the States, and this American boy says, "Who the hell authorized you to freeze the account?" And I didn't know what else to say, so I said, "The government of Liberia." And the government of Liberia hadn't really authorized me, so I had to run across the street. Chechipo was the Minister of Justice, and asked him to give me authorization to freeze the account. And once the accounts were frozen, Bala, myself, and there was a lawyer from the Ministry of Justice, we had to go to Paris, to Geneva, and to New York to find out what was in those accounts and have the money transferred back here. And Mr. Huff at the time was very recalcitrant. He wasn't about to send the money, so we finally came up with something to scare him, and we said we were going to report his income that he has withdrawn to the IRS. Then he agreed to give us $1 million to the account. So I'm traveling all over Europe with this $1 million manager's check laid out to the government of Liberia in my briefcase. But anyway, we got the account transferred to Citibank, and the shares were also at the time made out to 100% government of Liberia. But he transferred his 49%. Government has seized the CWP 50%, so it was 100% shares now, and that's the way I know it is. Later on, people went into the Vampire Forest. They had 1 million acres of forest land that they were operating in. And so after Vanfly, we had to look for investors to take over the concession because it was more than 10 years old now. The equipment was dead, and that's when we got the Israelis to come in. And the President Doe at the time was very open to the Israelis. That's a company called Yona International. Yeah, they took it over, and I didn't feel that I wanted to work with them, so I left and kind of started my own timber business. I used to go in the bush, buy timber, and sell it. I was like a timber buyer, and then put a profit on it and ship it. So I've always worked in the private sector for myself until 1988, when President Doe asked me to serve as the Commissioner of Income Tax. So I was with the Commissioner, I was the Ministry of Finance Commissioner of Income Tax for 88, 89, and then 90 he asked me if I could go up to expenditure, but I didn't stay as Deputy Minister for expenditure very long, because then of course 1990 all kinds of things happened, and then I had to leave, and that's from 1990 to 1994. I stayed in the States, so my grandmother was already almost 90 years old, and I didn't want to stay there, so I came back the beginning of 1996, and then April 6th, we had to go again, so I went to Abidjan, stayed in Abidjan for 18 months and worked with the African Development Bank there. Until the election 1997, I worked very actively with the Johnson Sirleaf campaign. And so I was surprised when I got a call saying that I was being asked to work in the Taylor government as Deputy Minister for Revenue. Sillaby called me actually, because he and I have worked together on it, and that's how I got into revenue. But I didn't think I was going to get it because I had no prior connections with Taylor. He didn't really know me, but it was on Minister Sillaby's word that he chose to accept me. And I must say we worked in a professional capacity. We didn't have any real personal relationship, but I think he appreciated my professionalism, and he dealt with me on that basis. And after that, when they said get out of Ministry of Finance in 2003, I got out and formed a private investment company with 2 other partners, and that's where I am right now.
Thank you very much. I realize you spent more than we anticipated, but I just want to bring 1 or 2 things to your notice, and maybe you could say a little bit more. We have a form letter here of GOL tax payment transfer. We spoke about that, and you said you were authorized to make these transfers. Then you will be giving us some documentation on some of the presidential authorizations. But basically they are signed by you, and specific accounts are identified. Some of them I can recognize. And I was wondering whether you have an idea as to who these account holders were. For example, Nations Bank, Florida. The amount of 91,000 was directed for transfer in July.
I have that. Now, hindsight is something. Now that I look hindsight on those letters, I should have preceded those letters with by authority of the president. I did not do that because at the time these letters were done under really high pressure situation. But I had the listing in front of me with his initials and his okay and all of that, and all of those were listed.
You still have that listing?
I still got it. That's the same one. So each one, and then the nature of the transfer, the reason for the transfer is also listing. Is also listed.
It's
so
possible.
If I had thought about it, I would have.
That these were just means of what's the word you use, of cleaning up money for illegal purposes.
Is it possible? Was what?
That this money were being laundered?
Launder money. How would you know if you see a payment to Nations Bank for uniforms for the police? How would you know?
Because one of these, Hong Kong and Shanghai.
Shanghai, those, I think that's the one for the boats, the patrol boats.
Yeah.
Everything there, every one of those letters has an explanation in the listing that he initialed. Right.
Hong Kong and Shanghai are arms dealers.
I have no idea. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Bank of New York is an account established by Myron Shaw when he was Minister of Finance, and all subsequent ministers of China of Finance have been signatory to this account. Bank Diamante and Versul of Mr. Sanjivan Rupa. He's a renowned,
yes, I saw his name on the list.
He's a renowned arms dealer.
I saw his name.
And that's 500,000.
Yeah.
So please, we will.
I will give you a photocopy of that.
Yeah.
It's in my office right now, and I don't think my people are closed yet. If somebody wanted to go with me, I'll just hand it out to them.
Tomorrow is okay. You mean
tomorrow? Okay.
If you do it. Then lastly, I would have go through the other ones. We recognize that these were abnormal times.
I mean, I have no
coming.
idea that those accounts were being made, specifically since there wasn't any arms mentioned.
Yeah.
Maybe it was done deliberately so that I would know what was going on, because like I said, we did strictly professionally. If he wanted to do something straight and above board, he would write to me and I would do it. And like I said, in hindsight, maybe I should have said by authorization of, and then it wouldn't look as if I did it on my own. But I do have that letter, and I mean, there were about 3 or 4 people waiting to have that thing. It was rush. I remember the situation very well, and so I was just doing these letters quickly. They were all in the computer, and I guess there's some of the stuff that were taken out. And the reason given to me was that the auditors were coming and they wanted to show that this money was paid in good faith to the government. All right? And that's about, and if you look through my work at the Ministry of Finance, that is about the only unusual transaction that came out of my office under my signature. And all of that payment, I understand, have been done like 1999, 2000, and those letters were actually done in 2003. And the computer would show that.
Were there any personal gains out of all of these transactions?
No, I'm sorry. There wasn't any personal gain. I just thought that I was doing something in the line of duty. There wasn't any personal gain whatsoever. There were just instructions received, which I carried out. And that's probably one of the reasons he preferred to deal with me, because I didn't ask any questions. I just read it out.
One last question, ma'am. A lot has been said about Greater Diamond. Do you have any idea on what was their mission, how they came in, how they unceremonious?
Greater Diamond never really settled in. There was a lot of talk about Greater Diamond. They brought in equipment. The duty-free, according to the law, only the president actually can authorize duty-free unless you have a concession agreement. Duty-free to bring in all the heavy equipment was granted by the president. And there was one situation where he asked that the customs people go in to a certain office that they had and access the equipment that had been brought in. And that Greater Diamond were required to pay duty on it, even though the stuff had come in duty free. I don't know what went wrong, but I was asked to send customs people in. And so when my customs people went in to accept the equipment, I think they had all been taken out. And that was the only thing that I had with them, with Greater Diamond.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming and responding to our inquiries and for providing the information that you had. Is there anything you would like to say before you leave? If at all? Nothing.
No, I think I'm fine.
Okay. So thanks very much,
Okay.
Kennedy.